Hello and welcome to a quick review of Hebrew root basics. This is a review of the PowerPoint we had last week in class. So the Hebrew root system is, first of all, the system upon which the entire language is built. So if that makes it seem like Hebrew roots are an important idea, or the Hebrew root system is an important idea, that's because it is. It's one of the most important things we'll be learning in this course is how to work with the root system, um, talk about how words relate to each other, how words morph or how morphology works, how do words change as they change in meaning. So this is all related. It's important to know that the Hebrew root system is common to all Semitic languages. So this can be helpful if sometimes we don't have too many examples of a root in Biblical Hebrew. We can look at languages like Arabic or Aramaic and see what those words mean in those languages. And sometimes that can give us clues as to what those words might mean in Hebrew. Also, it's one of the most important steps to understanding the language. So it's just something you have to master if you're going to do well in this course. So what do we mean by root? What is a root? Well, a root is a particular arrangement of Hebrew letters. And it's the basis or the stem upon which Hebrew adds prefixes, suffixes, and changes vowel combinations in particular patterns to make meaning. So we begin with this basic root structure and we build on it to make words. It's also a combination of letters that conveys one or two or maybe even more basic ideas. Usually just kind of one basic idea. Sometimes, like words in English, roots can have two or three meanings that seemingly are unrelated to each other. So what do we mean? So let's work with an example root. So here we have the letter pay and combined with a kof and a dalet makes the root pei kov dalet, or as we'll learn in just a bit, sometimes we call this root pakad. We add on vowels just so we can talk about the root in a very abbreviated way, so we don't have to say pei kov dalet each time. We can just say pakad, and we all know what we're talking about. So here's an example root: three Hebrew letters arranged in a particular way, and we're again reading those letters from right to left. As I just mentioned, when we speak about roots, we typically add vowels into the first two root letters to make a word, like in this case, pakad, and we'll talk about the root pakad. We also speak about the letters being in a particular position. So this is also very important because when certain letters are in certain positions, words behave typically in a certain way sometimes. And we'll, in our upcoming lecture, we'll find out more about that. So in this particular root, pay is in first position, or we might call this a first pay root. So pay is in first position, kof is in second position, and dalet is in third position. Um, Sometimes you'll hear me or other authors' books talk about, again, pay being in first position. They'll say first pay. That means roots that begin with pays. Sometimes you would see second, like the kof letter. Um, Instead of being second kof, they might say middle kof. So sometimes the second position is referred to as the middle position. Um, Third position is usually or almost always just talked about as third position. So you might hear the word position one, or you might hear first. You might hear about position two, or middle, or position three. But that's what we're talking about, just the order that the letters appear. Also, a single root letter is called a radical. So that's just the term. It comes from Latin. And so in this case, the root pakad has three radicals. One of the radicals is pay, one is kof, and one is dalet. So the general meaning of this root. So just to give you, just as a broad overview, the idea that roots have kind of general meanings that become more specific as we make them into words. So this root has to do with counting and attendance, and it seems to be of a military origin. So if you think about why militaries would be interested in counting, they might want to know who is there and who is not. They want to take attendance. They want to hold people accountable. So I mentioned in the lecture that sometimes the Israelites get upset if certain tribes or certain people don't show up for battle. People want to know that. So it has to do with counting. And it also implies something broader about accountability. So um, just being present or being ready or actually carrying something out, fulfilling one's responsibilities, maybe is a good way to think about it. So just some examples of words that can be formed using this root pakad. So here's a word pekudat, and by that final tav at the end, you know that this is a feminine word. So it's just pekudat. They slapped on some vowels and a suffix, and they came up with a word. And that word happens to mean oversight. So it's like when somebody's overseeing somebody else, their oversight is their pekudat. Here's another word, pakid, and I said you'll just have to trust me that there's a dagesh in that first letter. Pakid. Again, we've given this word different vowels, and we come up with the word commissioner or overseer. Here's another word, pekidut, and this word means oversight. So very similar to what we've seen already. But the vowels are different. We have the taf ending, so it's a feminine word. And here's another word, pikud, which means precept, law, or rule. So we can kind of vaguely draw a connection between all of these words, but I would say most importantly, you've seen examples of how different vowels, different combinations of vowels are applied to the same root to create new and different words. And we've noticed also that an ending, in this case a feminine ending, was added, and it was also helpful in changing a root into a real word. So let's talk about the verb that comes from pakad. That verb means to attend to visit, to muster troops in the sense that you have to gather troops together, you muster them. We don't use that word too much. Or to appoint somebody to do a particular thing. Now it's interesting when these verbs are applied in real context in the Bible, sometimes we can come up with fairly different meanings, but if we understand the basic meaning of the root, we can probably make more sense of the translation. So here's a verse that uses the pakad root, and I've indicated the English equivalents in the verse to the root pakad. So this is the Lord dealt with Sarah as he had said, and the Lord did for Sarah as he had promised. So you probably remember the story of Sarah, how she is very old, and Yahweh tells her that she's going to have a baby, and she laughs, whether that's out of indignation or skepticism or joy. The text doesn't say, but in any event, she laughs. But eventually, she does actually become pregnant. So this verse, the Lord dealt with Sarah, uses this verb pakad, which is maybe interesting and hard to connect with the kind of general root meaning, to appoint or to take care of something, to be accountable for something, bring something to account. Here we have another verse that uses the same verb. Though they offer choice sacrifices, though they eat flesh, the Lord does not accept them. He will remember their iniquity and punish their sins. So we see completely different translations of the same verb. In this verse, we have the verb translated as dealt with. In this verb, we have it as punish. And this verse seems to be a good thing, and this verse seems to be a scary thing, at least if you are kind of offering false sacrifices in the book of the prophet Hosea. But they do relate to each other if you think about them. In both cases, Yahweh comes and calls a situation to account. Or, in other words, um, Yahweh arrives, sees what is wrong, and corrects the situation. And in the case of Sarah, what is wrong, if you will, or what is missing, or what is lacking, or what is not accounted for, or what is not fully accounted for, is the fact that she has not been able to bear children. So Yahweh comes and um, does this action pakad. In other words, he comes and makes things right, changes the situation from something that is lacking to something that is fulfilled. And in the same way, um, the same thing happens in this situation that invokes punishment. So here we have, assumedly, Israel um, offering sacrifices that Yahweh does not accept. So, um, and this has been going on for a long time, apparently. And Yahweh comes and remembers their iniquity and punishes their sins. So here's something that is lacking, something that is wrong, is in a different way, but though maybe in the same sense, called to account by Yahweh. So if we, I guess the point here is that if we understand the broad meaning of the root, kind of how it can be used, we can get a fuller and deeper sense of um, what is exactly happening in the verse that may not be well conveyed by English. And you can also kind of come up with other possibilities that the translator could have used in this case, but chose not to. So one of the big limits of having an English translation is, excuse me, we always see the result of the translator's work, but we don't ever kind of see the thought process of the translator, or rarely do we see the thought process. So we don't have notes, translation notes, typically where the translator says, well, these other options might have worked well here too, or here were some other choices that I was considering. I eventually went with dealt with, um, but here are some other choices that would have worked as well. And when you're reading a translation, you don't get to see that there were other choices that were equally as valid and maybe have some slight difference and nuance in meaning. So that's one of the great things about taking a class in Hebrew or any original language is you can understand better the choices that a translator makes. And you can understand better that translation and the process of translation is not simply A equals B all the time. It's not um, that it's a one-for-one correspondence. Translation is not a one-for-one correspondence. There could be many ways to get across the same idea that the Hebrew is trying to convey. So if you understand choices, then you at least understand the breadth of what a verse can mean in a particular case. So hopefully that's one of the reasons why you're in Hebrew class. Hope you've enjoyed this review. Have a great day.